So good afternoon, everyone, to the second panel of day one of Urban Arc 2023. My name is Aditi Suri. I'm a researcher here at the School of Human Development at IIHS. And I'm happy today to share four compelling presentations and cases on the flux of urban inequality and inclusion in Indian cities. So the theme of this year's Urban Arc is Flux. No guesses why that's the theme. We have been through a period of immense flux and also seen incredible ways in which stagnation has taken place in our cities. And these last few years have been bookended by very compelling examples of inequality in our cities. The presentations today give us a sense of what the enduring nature of urban inequality can look like in our cities, those aspects that are so resistant to change despite public interventions or civil society interventions. And they help us understand how urban inequality gets reproduced and also challenged by actors of change like residents themselves. We have two different cases on education in Indian cities today. The first explores an NGO-led educational intervention in Mumbai that has worked to make education inclusive through a dynamic pedagogy that makes young Mumbai residents foster better relationships and become more employable and become agents of change in their own cities. The second case is quite distinct. It explores the failure of a rehabilitation program for migrant children, migrant child labor in Jaipur, where a government intervention around education failed to rehabilitate and embed children in formal educational institutions. The third case we have comes from small enterprise landscape of tier 3 cities in rural areas of the country, a division that's often analytical and where the areas resemble economic opportunity despite there being this analytical difference. The case explores how vital small businesses are for residents who own these businesses, but equally for people who are working in them. And it shows a compelling case of what it means for resilience of this economic form. Finally, we have a perspective on the access of basic services in small towns and large metropolitan areas that questions what the geography of deprivation is. Along these four presentations today, I'm going to ask all of the presenters, three of whom are online and one set of presenters who are with us today, to stick to 15 minutes for your presentations. So that gives us a good half an hour at the end for discussions and to speak through common themes that come up in these discussions. And we'll offer a time check for everyone at 5 minutes and at 2 minutes. And as you all begin and I open the floor to you, can I ask you also to introduce yourselves and kind of contextualize where your work is for the institutions you work at. So with that, I open the floor to the first presenter, Abhishek from PUKAR. If you're online, can you start sharing your screen and take us through your work on education in Mumbai?
Hi, Aditi. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be sharing our findings from a collaborative research project conducted at the Mumbai-based NGO called PUKAR while we were working there. So this is a research where the researchers were working at the site of inquiry. We wanted to thank IIHS for allowing us to present our findings and engage with the scholars here. In PUKAR, we'll be focusing on the flagship program called Youth Fellowship, which was started in 2005 to make research, the process of doing research, accessible to Mumbai's youth, specifically those from marginalized backgrounds, and to increase their involvement in their neighborhoods and the broader city. So a little about why we conducted this research. So research establishes that learners from marginalized backgrounds specifically face several barriers and discrimination in accessing and experiencing formal education system. And in addition, these systems have, quote, continued to build on the view that employability and economic growth are the chief aims, relegating the constitutional values of equality, justice, and fraternity, and hence active citizenship, to the sidelines. Given this background about the formal education system, we were curious about the non-formal educational spaces that are saying that we are not going to relegate these values and put them aside. We're going to prioritize these values. So using PUKAR's Youth Fellowship as a case study, we'll broadly ask two questions. One is, how does the program contest or reproduce urban inequalities, and how do learners and facilitators experience the program's pedagogy? And to go ahead, it will be useful to know what the Youth Fellowship is, how it's doing what it promises to do. It's a program that runs for about 11 months, primarily on Sundays, and barring some residential workshops. Fellows are mostly 10th or 12th standard they've completed 10th or 12th standard, and a minority of students are out of school, and they're primarily between the ages of 18 and 35 years of age. This is a group-based research, so usually the group size is between 8 to 10 at the start of the fellowship, and each year about 60 to 80 fellows graduate. And this is the idea is that you exercise your agency in choosing a research topic, so that the topic is not imposed on you. It comes about through discussion and through deliberation within the groups. This is the current form that it is in, and it is accredited by the Tata Institute of Social Sciences as a diploma and certificate course. That accreditation process took place a few years back, which we'll also discuss. This is a snapshot of the structure of the program. So as you can see, it starts uniquely with the self, deeply reflecting on the self, and ends with a graduation event, which is a public event where fellows present their findings in creative ways. Specifically about this research, the data collection process took place between Jain and September of last year, and it involved a look at the internal records on the program as well as published material, an FGD with the alumni working at the organization, participant observation during sessions, as well as 40 interviews with those involved in the program at various capacities, including alumni, facilitators, recent alumni and prospective fellows, and one funder. It also included reflective discussions. So there was a process of collaborative writing that we tried to do and we experimented with, and we used the purposive sampling method. So now that we've covered a bit about our methods, we share a selection of our research findings through themes that we hope shed some light on what has been happening since the program started in 2005. So about a 18 year long arc that we are hoping to cover. So the program, centrally believed that research should be a right, that anybody can do research, challenging the dominance of researchers from cis male, English speaking and Savarna backgrounds. And facilitators and coordinators were the ones responsible for reaching out to prospective fellows. It wasn't like they put an ad on Facebook and then people applied, and it was a little more complicated than that. So they described the outreach process, as dependent on their existing networks. And most facilitators and coordinators, the ones who were actually, conducting sessions, were from social work backgrounds, and they were primarily Marathi speaking as a primary mode of communication. And some were involved in social movements in the city as well. So there was a kind of belongingness and rootedness in the city. They would approach colleges since they were easier to mobilize groups of 8 to 10. Since that's a key component of the program. However, they would aim to go to peripheral and under-resourced colleges. Other places that they would go to include NGOs, shelter homes, and collectives. And for several consecutive years, the fellowship enrolled one group from an institutional home in Mumbai based on one coordinator's relationship with that institutional home. And PUKAR's long-standing involvement in three specific informal settlements, which is Mankhurd, Railroad, and Dharavi, also contributed to its reach. And since the start of the program, most fellows are women and girls, Muslim, Dalit, Adivasi, and working class or poor residents residing in the informal settlements of the city. And this is important because it has also called on the program to respond to diverse set of learners. And this happened specifically, for example, through one facilitator's observation that since some fellows could not eat well, since that person was aware that a lot of fellows were not eating well, they spoke about the decision to provide food even during workshops to all fellows. But however, overall, the fellows, the program's response to a diverse set of fellows' needs has been mixed since the program started. And in the past year specifically, leading members at PUKAR have expressed remorse while sharing their observation that fellows are increasingly from privileged backgrounds and are interested in obtaining a certificate from TIS at a relatively low fee. So their involvement would also qualify as proof for doing social work for opportunities at foreign universities. And one leading member frequently recounts one fellow's name who joined the program in its early years, Rajesh Kumar, who was a construction worker and came from a group where the fellows were construction workers, to exemplify the leading member's desire to make the program reach the quote most marginalized. So this desire to reach the most marginalized is paradoxical given the multiple priorities and projects of the organization. And the constant mention of Rajesh Kumar reminds us of what Jennifer Nash said when she wrote that in the case of both transnationalism and intersectionality, the bodies that are constantly invoked are symbolic, meaning that women's studies engages them not as fleshy material beings, but as metaphors, as promises, and often as peril, as sites of hope, and also as sites of failure. So what social background should most fellows come from? Most importantly, how does the program need to be restructured to engage with fellows as fleshy material beings? These questions require further attention. Several facilitators shared that they prioritized cultivating a relationship of co-learning and equals, in contrast to the traditional student-teacher relationship where an expert educates a learner. One facilitator described this aspect of the program as emotionally intensive, where bonds are built between individual fellows and facilitators. Facilitators guide them, motivate them, take an interest in their lives, create a safe space to make mistakes, and open avenues for further growth by tapping into the resources and networks of facilitators. Practically, this takes place by spending time after hours with fellows, calling one another by their first names, and cultivating a culture of asking questions. However, facilitators' involvements in other projects at the NGO and shifting priorities about the organization's management have limited the time spent on relationship building efforts during specific periods of the program. Facilitators and coordinators believe that understanding, valuing, and critically reflecting on lived experiences was vital to the success of this program. This took place through activities, practice, discussions, and other pedagogies that encourage whole-body learning. One facilitator shared that the feminist belief in the personal as political was implemented through activities such as the River of Life, which requires a fellow to write about their life experiences. The conventional research process was aimed to be challenged by starting the research endeavor with this activity, along with others that highlight social inequalities based on caste, gender, class, and sexuality, and the power, disadvantages, and privileges of fellows. We'll share a few excerpts from interviews to get a better sense of the program's pedagogy. पहले मेरे को थियरी नहीं पता थी, टर्मिनोलॉजीज नहीं पता थी, मेरे साथ जो हो रहा है वो सिर्फ मेरे साथ ही हो रहा है, ऐसे मुझे लगता था। इस कोर्स के जरिए जैसे लोगों से मिलते गई, लोगों की एक्सपीरियंस देखते गई, तो ये समझ आया कि मेरे जैसे बहुत सारे लोग हैं जिनको जेंडर, कास्ट, क्लास, इन सारी चीज़ों को लेके अलग अलग लेवल पे डिस्क्रिमिनेशन फेस करना पड़ रहा है। तो विक्टिम मैं अकेले नहीं हूँ, हर एक कोई डिफरेंट लेवल पे हर है और दोष सिस्टम का है। So here we have an alumni of the program where she links the discrimination she faced at the individual level to the group level and at the level of structures. And when asked about the differences in the formal education system and the experiential based system practiced, allegedly practiced at the youth fellowship, another fellow Janvi shared that मुझे फर्क दिखता है, 12 साल तक हमें सिर्फ बुक का पढ़ाया गया, बुक के बाहर क्या चल रहा है, कैसे चल रहा है, वो कुछ हमें नहीं बताया गया नहीं है। पढ़ो और मार्क्स लाओ, इतना ही सिखाया गया था। पर मैंने जो यहाँ पे आके सीखा था एक्टिविटीज के दौरान, मतलब समझ कैसे चलता है, समाज में क्या चीजें है वो जाना। So Janvi felt engaged through the pedagogy used during the fellowship. And transitioning now to the process of institutionalization that I mentioned, where the program became accredited by the Tata Institute of Social Sciences a few years back. So several team members had a lot of apprehensions about the process of formalizing a non-formal program. The questions kind of largely were about, would the accreditation validate the knowledge fellows produce? Would the accreditation help fellows in their future endeavors and self-perception as well? The team members agreed, based on the account of one leading member, that these two things would happen, particularly in terms of employability. Would the Tata Institute of Social Sciences diploma tag assist fellows in the future employability prospects? However, the team also had apprehensions about the institution's regulating pressures. One facilitator wrote, "It was a big achievement for the team to get accredited with a well-known institute like this after the gap and major loss in funding sources from 2013 to 14. That's a mistake. It should be 13 to 14. My apologies. On the other hand, the disaccreditation impacted the profile of the fellows and vulnerable groups like NACA workers, construction workers, domestic workers, and transgender people. The major focus was shifted to run the course as per the credit requirements, attendance, and assessment processes." So this was followed by a reflection among the group members that PUKAR should look inwards and cultivate legitimacy on its own terms rather than look elsewhere. Another theme that we wanted to share about is about post-fellowship trajectories, which involve asking fundamental questions about the program itself. Should it be designed around preparing fellows to contribute to knowledge production in the mainstream and catalyze the individual social mobility? Should it be designed to get fellows to join social movements? And yes, it's not clear that these paths can be paved by or decided by a program, but it's important to have a sense of what we imagine fellows to do after the program is completed. This is particularly important in a context where NGOs have functioned as depoliticizing, conformist, and even status agents. In that context, it becomes even more relevant to know the kind of function this program is supposed to play to the urban processes in the city. And a few themes that we found interesting and that we're happy to discuss later that we haven't explored at this presentation due to time constraints is the question is the pathway and meaning of action, since the program strives to link participatory processes, action research processes. So what does it mean and what has it meant over the years? The question of language in a multilingual classroom, the role of group work and urban knowledge production processes. And we'll now briefly talk about some of the limitations of the research processes. So one major limitation and opportunity actually is that researchers are employed by the organization that runs the program under review. We sometimes found it difficult to reach members associated with the program who had not had a positive experience. and to be truly critical of the program. And another limitation is that internal records about fellows' backgrounds, their social backgrounds, their disciplinary backgrounds were fragmented and partial. Since more than 2,000 fellows have graduated from the program since it started. As well as the last limitation, which I'm sure we all have as researchers, is that there are multiple projects and priorities. So how do we ensure that this gets the type of attention that it deserves? So all in all, we've aimed to understand how PUKAR's Youth Fellowship has responded to the goal of making research accessible to Mumbai's marginalized residents, to affirm local knowledge and knowledge of marginalized groups, to open alternate avenues of learning in contrast to standardized classrooms and course-based pedagogy, and create space for democratic engagement. We presented a selection of our findings, which would discuss the profile of fellows and facilitators, the outreach process, the relationship between fellows and facilitators, the pedagogy, and questions over post-fellowship trajectories. Aside from a traditional research paper, we worked on a website and a podcast, as well as a curriculum that we hope will serve as resources for engagement and feedback. That are work in progress, and that some of which can be accessed now. And thank you. This was made possible with support from the TESF and IIHS network. And I'd like to thank the supporters and who we've mentioned in this last slide. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you so much. We will take questions in the end. Can I ask the next presenter to start speaking? Sujata, are you online?
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm. Yeah.
Okay, Sujata. Please start, and we'll let you know about when you.
Recording in progress.
Sure. So, a very good afternoon to everyone. So, as the title suggests, this case study actually started with understanding the issue of child labor and how the concepts of migration and education interweaved in the journey we'll explore in the case study and the presentation. So I'm a research scholar at the National Institute of the Educational Planning and Administration in New Delhi. So this was a part of my MPhil research work, which I'm sharing. So I'll start the presentation with with the data, the statistics, which just breaks our heart to see how many working children population we have in our country. So this is the census data of 2011. It says that 10.1 million. So we have seen this figure many a times, but what we haven't seen is that the other 13.7 million children who are, the UNICEF, the International Convention of the Child of the Rights of the Child, consider a child to be like somebody who's below the 18 year of age. But we have different policies which mention a child age, like it's contested. In many policies, it is said that adolescents are 15 to 17 years of age. So combinedly, we see a very big proportion. It's a very significant proportion of working children in our country. And this figure, beyond this figure, we have children who migrate with their families, and their data might not be here in the official figures. So when a child is deprived of the opportunity, first, that begins once the education is not accessible to the child. He becomes prone to get into the child labor. So I'll just start with a piece. It's a news piece which says that a very big sum, 23,117 victims of human trafficking, and they were rescued. And out of this very big figure, 14,183 victims were below the age of 18. Now, this news piece has a lot of details. Some of the details were that most of them were from the very remote areas, the rural areas, who came to cities to work either with their family or were trafficked. So how these children land up in workshops in Jaipur from their school. It's a very disheartening to see. And, when we talk about Jaipur, we think of spending our vacations in winter, or palaces, or handicrafts. But this is one of the ugly reality of that beautiful city. So so this data was collected with the help of this initiative, Child Labour Free Jaipur, which is a joint initiative of the government of Rajasthan and government of Bihar. It had multiple. The project is winding up this year, so it had multiple stakeholders, government, NGOs, corporate, and community together is working. So I've already discussed the definition of child in India and international level. But I'll just mention some of the words, highlighted in the worst form of child labor. When the child is being enslaved, trafficked away from his home and exposed to hazardous working condition, and which not only physically harm the child, but also psychosocial damage is such that, it's very difficult to overcome those things and to help the child go through such a hectic and such a very tedious whole process. So I'll just move forward. So we have many policies and program in place. Since 1986, the first act came for the prohibition and the regulation of child labor. And then we have some programs, national level programs came up. And at the end, the last one was the Right to Education Act, which was committed to ensure, the objective of the Right to Education Act was inclusive education and to send the children who are out of school. So the objective of this case study was basically to examine the challenges of educational rehabilitation of the rescued child laborers. So in a way, we are trying to see the issue of child labor from the lens of RTE. So it's an exploratory study. Qualitative study was done. We have used case study method. So there's a list of how many children are repatriated from Jaipur to their home state. So from that list, we have selected this case through purpose of sampling. And the things that we have considered, that the month of repatriation, we wanted to choose a case that at least 6 months of repatriation, so that we can, the whole process and summoning and the court judgment, legal proceedings we can ensure that in those months, at least that can be settled. Industry, handicraft industry, and confirmation that the child is enrolled after the repatriation at his home state. So the data was collected through semi-structured interviews, official documents, reports, and observation. So apart from the child whom the case study is covered, we have also taken the consideration of the family members, the school teachers where the child was enrolled, advocates at the Jaipur High Court who are dealing with the child labor cases, and social workers and activists of Child Labor Free Jaipur initiative, and counselors at shelter home. Documents which we have reviewed are the FIR, medical records maintained by the NGO, observation of the courtroom, community, village, schools, etc. was done. So why Jaipur? Because there's I'll just show the data. I'll directly come to that. So it's a question raised in the Legislative Assembly of the cases of bonded labor. See, it is only the cases of bonded labor and not the complete child labor scenario that we can see. So the Jaipur shows that there's a increasing trend from 2011 onwards. And the most surprising thing is, in many of the FIRs, even in this case, the Bonded Labor Act was not even, the case was not even registered under the Bonded Labor Act. So I'll just move to the case study now. So it was a case study of a 13-year-old boy. He is from Gaya, Bihar. he now, after the repatriation, he was directly enrolled in class 6 as per the age appropriate clause of Right to Education Act. And before that, he's never been to any school. The parents were migrated to Jaipur from Bihar in 2017 and working as a migrant laborer in brick industry. So he was rescued. He was rescued from Bhatta Basti. It's a place in Jaipur which is basically for the bangle making industry. And in this Bhatta Basti, in every house we can see that the work of bangle making was done, the Lakh bangle. So he was repatriated in June. So there was a 6 months time that he has gone through the rehabilitation process from the police station to the shelter home to recording his statements at CWC and to repatriated to his home back to Gaya. So now, if we look at some details, there's a pattern. It's not only about this case, but there's a whole pattern that there's a group of people. Children come in groups and individually also from particular hotspots. Gaya is one of them. Samastipur, Gaya, Vaishali, Muzaffarpur from Bihar. This child was also from that hotspot. He was from Gaya and he was from community of Musahars. And maximum children which I've talked to, which I could interact to, they were from the same community. And the parents were working in Jaipur. So how he came into this bonded labor? So actually the parents, with the broker, they find the migrant laborers an easy target. They talk to them and they just, in the lure of some more money, they ask their children to work with them, and in exchange they will give some money. So the child was sent with the parents' consent with the broker. And there he was working, you won't believe, he was working 16 to 18 hours a day. And not only him, there's a lot of children who work in these conditions, very confined places, 10 by 10 ka room hota hai, and most of the children work in same position. They keep, if they fall asleep, they'll be given earthing shocks and they'll be burned by the candle wax. Lot of things which are there, and they were given 2 meals a day. So there are a lot of things which consider as bonded labor, and still that clause doesn't go in the FIR. So as per the records, his educational rehabilitation was done, because after repatriation he was enrolled in a government school. The family was supported. Economical rehabilitation was also done. Economical rehabilitation in the sense the NGO, the Child Labour Free Jaipur initiative, has supported the family with pottery, given some initial capital. So yeah, this is the FIR. So this is the clause acts which was there in this child's FIR, and Bonded Labour Act was not there. So now the challenge was that the RTE, through the act of RTE, he was, as per the age appropriateness, he was enrolled, but he was not given any support, just to ready. There is no school readiness in the child. He eventually dropped out of the school after 3 months. And the worst part is the teacher didn't even know. When we talked to the teacher, she didn't know the background of the child, that he had a history of child labor, and he did not have this. He has never been to school before enrolling in class 6th. So this made us question a lot of things in the act and how we are taking things for granted when we are doing this rehabilitation program. And in our reports, we are doing successful rehabilitation and educational rehabilitation. So we have many programs which are there for the bridge course of the children before they enroll in school, but they were not accessible. There is no NCLP school near their location. They could not locate. They could not go there. They could not access it. So the major challenges which I saw, that after the child was repatriated, very less attention was paid to his health. When a child was working for various, not only days, months, in a very confined place for 16 to 18 hours, he had a very poor health condition. They developed this respiratory issues, visual impairment, many things. They have this deformed fingers and knees because they keep sitting in the same position. They keep doing the same work for a very long hour. So apart from that, the psychosocial challenge was that they internalize this whole scenario, the whole condition. They internalize it so much that they think that by rescuing them, the police has done a very bad thing to them. They were earning well and they were supporting their family, but then police came and they rescued them. पकड़ लिया पुलिस ने. ये नहीं बोलते कि पुलिस ने बचाया. They use this language that पुलिस ने पकड़ लिया, हमारे पैसे भी चले गए, अब कुछ नहीं मिलता. So apart from that, there's a sense of belongingness which is compromised. The child, when I was talking, it was not easy that the child will open up suddenly. So it took a long time for the child to open up. So the things that he shared, his sense of belongingness was so compromised that he did not know what to do. The parents are in Jaipur. They're still in Jaipur. And he was repatriated to his home state back, where he's staying now with the grandparents. So where should he go? So there's a lot of things, we have many institutions coming up with new policies, old policies, and when we do some changes in our policies. But the processes remain. The loopholes in the processes remain the same. And poverty, when it intersects with the other social factors of discrimination, in this case, caste was one of the leading factor. Apart from that, there was a very conflicting issue of migration. So it opened a black box of mainstreaming of out-of-school children. There's a whole program, national level program, National Child Labour Project, on the mainstreaming of out-of-school children. But how it is not ensuring the basic thing, the psychosocial aspect the child was going through. The counseling was just limited to the shelter home, 2 or 3 sessions. So yeah, the school administration is also responsible for reporting if the child is not coming to school, if not attending the classes regularly. And in these cases, these children are they're out of school for so many days, for so many times. Nobody come to their house to see where the child is. So I'll just end my presentation with one thing that it actually the conclusion of this study was, we have various ministries looking at different aspects of this whole issue. We have Ministry of Labour, we have Ministry of Education, we have Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, and how they are working in integration to work on this very important and complex issue.
Sujata, can I ask you to wrap up in about 30 seconds with your concluding points?
Yeah, I've just finished, ma'am.
Sure.
Yeah. So with the remark that with the quotation of Mahatma Gandhi, just stop this presentation. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable member. So I rest the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sujata, for that very well presented but sobering presentation. I think we can take questions around the education sectors after, and we're wrapping up. But to everyone who's joining online, there is a Q&A box where you can start dropping your questions for the panelists. Can I ask the next presenters to start who are with us in this room?
Yeah.
Can you please introduce yourselves and
do you want to go first so that I can go and then?
Okay, my name is Shah. I'm from Lead at Korea University. That was okay. Yeah, I'm here for the day.
Yeah, I'm Kinjal and I'm a researcher with this institute, the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. It's the clip. Yeah. And today we're both presenting work from a survey we did during COVID of about 1,400 micro enterprises. It was a panel survey over 5 rounds. We ended up with about 50% of that panel being retained at the end of round 5. It's interesting actually to, one sec.
Maybe you can ask them to change the slide.
No?
Yeah.
It's interesting to actually follow from the last panel as well as the previous presentation, because here the unit of our analysis has now moved to an enterprise. And personally for me, this was very interesting because we went from individual to household to enterprise, and I could see the increasing layers of complexity coming in. The very questions that to me were straightforward entitlements became real challenges when I started looking at it from this angle. What was the motivation for it? Apart from the text that is already on the slide, for some of you who may not know, there are 60, so the Indian MSME landscape is extremely, by MSME I mean micro, small and medium enterprise landscape, is extremely skewed towards the micro. The micro is defined as anyone doing a annual revenue of under 5 crores a year. And of the 63 million MSMEs we have, 60 million are micro. And not only are they micro, they're actually what we analytically call nano. It's not a formal terminology, but a lot of us have started using it because the challenges of this particular segment is very different from even someone who's doing a 5 crore revenue annually. Okay, so a lot of all of our sample lies in this category of micro across tier 3 and rural areas. Now, one of the things about informality that is defined for labor is there are 3 particular conditions that we look at. One is the employer-employee stickiness, actually in the NSSO that is defined as a written contract, a paid leave, and any kind of social entitlement of any kind actually qualifies a person to be categorized as formal labor. Given this, and given that 75% of our labor is at least in this definition categorized as informal, what we actually try to do is push that envelope and see the degree of what is it that this employer-employee footlooseness, as we call it, what is the degree of it and what is the nature of it. And in this sense, I think this set of data has been fairly challenging for me personally, because there is, we analyzed it both from the angle of the intention of the employer to keep the labor going on rolls vis-a-vis the everyday constraints, the financial constraints of running a business, and how they could actually, sort of go ahead with it. And before we launch into, these are just statistics that a lot of us would be familiar with, but to actually, while the statistics are on, I want to talk about the nature of a micro enterprise, where some of our very long-held notions of employer versus employee, labor versus capital, personal savings versus business capital start to diminish. And it is in this context that we are analyzing this unit of an enterprise and how it actually tided through the 2 years of COVID. And for that, let me read out actually Scholar Adnan Nasimullah's quote, which I think really frames our inquiry very well. He says, the practical informalization of labor is Janus-faced. While it relieves management of formal statutory obligations, it also gives skilled workers much less incentive to stay in one place. The Economist Intelligence Unit has reported that the labor shortages are now cropping up in both manufacturing and service unit. The availability of skilled laborers is half that of the Asian average in India in 2014. Now, what this does is that when many different sort of workers need to work together, and it makes a while for workers to be trained and integrated into the production processes, leaving micro enterprises in a constant state of endemic uncertainty for manufacturing firms. Indian firms, therefore, are compelled to govern themselves. In order to increase the predictability of investment, firms invest in structured networks of long-term relationships with other industrial actors, other firm workers, financiers, and agents of international economy. This kind of, in a way, makes us rethink the notion of footlooseness of labor, and says that while there may be an absence of a written contract, is there a stickiness that we are observing in our work. So quickly, Sharon is going to take us through the details of our analysis, but a couple of things that we hold on to as we analyze is A, the size of the firm, and B is we look very closely at the financial health of the enterprise through this entire period and juxtapose the patterns we see in labor retrenchment across these two particular categories. So yeah, over to you, Shan.
Thanks a lot, Kanya, for a nice description. So I'll go very quickly because I think this is a panel and the numbers actually can get confused when you start slicing and dicing. So we actually followed, and I think this is one of the only surveys in India where we followed these enterprises for 5 rounds. It was actually 6th round a little bit later that was done more recently to understand. So I'll go through the numbers and just the key highlights that we want to articulate, but I think Kinjal actually articulated well the key position, right, to understand this crux of how employees stay in employment that's actually, for our definition, precarious, but for them is actually, to get the term, one of these non-state actors for social protection. These micro enterprises function a lot for them. If you can go, so just go through the study. Yeah, okay, great. Actually, one of the key things is that one of the key distinctive things about this sector is that there is no aggregator for very small enterprises. So there's an aggregators in rural areas. When you look at women's collectives and self-help groups, there's a very distinct, NLM has put a transmission channel by districts, states, blocks, etc. But when you look at tiny enterprises, even they don't necessarily fall under the CIE or the FICCIs and things like that. They just notionally fall under. But if you want to look at an aggregator that really tries to help them, there are far and few kind of big things. So one of the areas is, one of the big questions why we started this survey is that, well, we were seeing that cash is one of the biggest constraints for these small firms. So you want to take a pulse of understanding, you know, how much cash do they have in hand? Do they need cash? And if so, there was various I guess, incentives, programs that the government was trying to struggle with during COVID. Even I was getting texts from people from Tamil Nadu government, and they were saying, where again did you say again this issue with database? How do we reach into this sector and give them money? Because the banks will not. Even if there was moratorium and things like that, it was only on paper. The government has no ability to supervise the banks. And even if they said no, they said we'll do it in principle. But I have actually friends who had small business who tried it, and they're pretty okay, and they got refused. Can you imagine a small kirana shop going and anything like that? So just a very quick assessment of we sort of looked at sort of a little bit of the pattern. This is a purposeful sample, so we got a few of our people that we knew to say across the country to say, are you willing to follow up with us? It's we separated by business types: a fixed store, home-based businesses, and a small business platform. A good majority were fixed stores like kirana shops and things like that, which correspond to this micro enterprise segment. By the way, like Kinjal mentioned, the majority of businesses in India, even if the definition is 5 crores, they're about 10 lakh a year turnover, which is extremely small. How do you?
Just one there.
Yeah. Oh, voila. Okay, great. Yeah. And we looked at the distribution. So when you look at any curves that look at this MSME segment, it is wide-tailed towards the end. The majority is single enterprise owner. I think that has been characteristic. And when you talk about stickiness of employment we're discussing today, I would say stickiness of that whole system, that structure in India, the manufacturing system has been there for 2 decades. The number of contribution of GDP is stagnant to 40%. The number of firms have been stagnant. So there's no growth in that area. Even jobs, people, it's almost a hand-to-mouth system. So it's a shade above livelihoods where people have figured out maybe a better mousetrap to live. in a sense. And they try to also see, okay, well, I wrote a bit, I need to help people, in a sense. So when you look at the distribution, this is when we started. A lot of it were 20% solo entrepreneur, after that one, and a very small portion has 20% off. So just to give a look at the financial status, so this is, remember, this is a panel. So I will get up because I was like, so if you look at a panel, so here we looked at here, round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the times were not the same. Even we tried every 2 months. After that, we tried 6 months and 5 months. It's calling to someone every 2 months during a pandemic crisis, are you okay? They didn't want to call us after if you're asking for the same question, ideally. So we spaced it out a bit. And we follow the structure. So you see, as the pandemic grew, came up and down with the various lockdowns, so is the average percentage of sales that they had. No? And when we look at the labor, we'll also see how that also fluctuates as well. The labor fluctuates almost directly, how their cash and their sales directly. So if you look at regular profit, is your business performing better? Because some businesses perform better after lockdown, in a sense. And the amount of cash reserves, so it actually went to very dire straits. 81% has zero cash reserve. Then it was a bit more functional, then it went back again on the second wave. So this just to give to financial status, and as well the dip in savings. Here when you see, like people had to, more than half it at the end, to dip in their savings. And this is among those who had savings. So there's a good proportion who had no more left. So this is also to say that when we look at the movement of workers across here, we saw here our solo entrepreneurs is the movement that went the most, because a lot of them are home-based businesses or kirana shop. They could function, not function, because the supply chains were fractured and things like that. But when you can see as well, although there's a lot of fluctuation up and down, there's a little bit of variation in each one, but the proportions remained largely the same, I would say. There was a lot of movements in solo entrepreneur and 2 to 3 as well. And when you talk about sickness, it's like the system doesn't move, it reacts instead. So it says, this is going to happen, I'm going to do this, in a sense. So, and it's pushed to the limit. So it goes to there until it cannot anymore, until it runs out of cash. So game over. It's almost like a zero-sum game, in a sense. I have this much money, I go this, I go there, somebody gives me more, and things like that. When you look at this definition of layers, so I remember this first round when there was a lot of news about firing people in industries. There was this famously, I think Vicky had done something that 30% of employees were laid off. We were surprised by the 8.35%. Yeah. And they came back and they said, well, you know, they told us this, we checked the question again. And ideally, if you want to fire someone, you actually have to hire them. To hire them, you need a formal contract. So I think that was a crux in it to see, okay. And here, the firing came a little bit, there's a lot of fluctuation in this. So it came really sad, and nowhere the dire straight numbers where people lost like 35% of staff, etc. So that's one of the crux of it. About half the firms laid off workers at least once, so it's not the same people. And they see a category of people who didn't lay off. Layoff versus not working. So here, the definition, and this is we learned in our surveys when you look at
the mic. So
oh yeah, sorry, I take this from my. So this here, when you look at what happening is that we did, because this is a phone survey. It's like a 20-minute survey. People are very busy during the pandemic. They probably don't want to talk about their finance more than they should. So we're lucky to get this information. So when we look at here, you say, okay, we looked at if you laid off people versus not working versus firm that decreased, because we asked number of workers you currently have. There's a huge gap here. And this also means that the notion of furlough is hugely strong. In a sense, there's a lot of fluctuation. So those employees are not fired. They do not want to let them go, but they don't have jobs when they are not working, in a sense. So that's why you see, and you see this fluctuates along with some of the cash profiles. So I'm in the process of doing sort of like a longer regression, because there's too many components and you can slice it away, but you can clearly see some of the movement here. And the difference here in projections when you say layoffs versus not working. When we looked at another one here, here we actually asked the question, why are you not laying off people? I think the notion of trust, the huge responsibility that these small enterprises have towards their employees, because there are no social protection for them specifically, they would sort of like be their social protection until they cannot anymore. So some of the employers sort of like did not pay salary, but they gave basic assistance. They gave food, they gave shelter where they could. They helped people pay back to go for the home. So we got some and people have been there for, and when you think about that, their employees are also an investment. So if you train someone for a long time, for 4 years, it's a huge cost for you to find someone else that A, you trust, B, you train. When you look about, what about if to hire? Because there was some hiring during the pandemic. So here,
when you look at the difference between intent to hire versus staff increase, so the differences are much smaller. So people are much predicting, you say, I'm going to hire next month or next time, then I'm going to lay people off. So there's a stickiness to some of the work. I'm almost on, just 1 second. When we thought from this complementary field work, so we went to the field and we say, why are people remaining in employment even if they don't have a contract or things like that? They trust their employer. So their employer gives them loan advance when required, 35%. Any employee that goes to the bank, will they get credit right away? No. Provide financial support during festival and medical needs. I think health being one of the huge costs. If you have an employer that says, I'll help your health bill in advance. Accommodation, incentive, food, and assistance with families. Those are all things that provides that stickiness that you see. Okay, that's one of the reasons why employees would stay. If you don't, the work is basically largely on orders project. When money comes in, I know exactly, and that's why it's easier to project. I have a demand coming in, I need this amount of staff. But since they don't know if the demand is coming out, they want to retain in case as an emergency because they invested in the people as well. And after that, 85% actually mentioned it's difficult to replace the work when someone leaves. So, and they don't hire from like we would do, and it's just word to mouth they get people. So it's also a different system to allocate. So that's maybe the main messages that you got from the data we have. Yeah. So, Kisha, do you want to add something else?
Yeah,
that's a very quick overview of a very big data set. Yeah. Thank you.
No, this is. This is fascinating, and we have. I'm sure many questions will come in about it. Can I ask our last presenter to come online and present? Divyendu Biswas, are you online?
Yeah, can you hear me, ma'am?
I can hear you.
Oh. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I am Divyendu. I am pursuing PhD at the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. And I am thankful to the organizers to provide me with this opportunity to present this paper. And the title of this paper is, Has the Geography of Deprivation Changed in Post-Reform Urban India? A Look into Relative Poverty and Access to Basic Services. This is a part of my PhD dissertation, and this work is under peer review process, so it is not published yet. So as you know that with the rapid urbanization, the poverty is also getting urbanized, and India is being no exception. And India hosts the highest number of slum population around the globe. And in the literature, slums have been conceptualized as the pockets where the urban poor live, which is also true for India. And believing in such kind of a normative positions, the government of India since the independence has formulated many policies to tackle urban poverty, like the basic services to urban poor, the Rajiv Awas Yojana, etc. But then a few studies have come up recently, which have shown that it is not the case that the poor, the urban poor, are only concentrated in the slums, or in other words, there is a presence, widespread presence of urban poor in the non-slum areas in India as well. Another set of studies on the geographical concentration of poverty following the emergences of the smaller towns around in the developing countries has tried to examine the relationship between population sizes of urban center and poverty, which is popularly known as the poverty gradient analysis. And these studies have found a metropolitan bias in terms of poverty, where the bigger cities have a lower poverty rate, and also bigger cities are also provided with better infrastructural availability, and which is also true for India. And these kinds of pictures are well known to us, and this is a picture from Dharavi. So then in India, we have a lower urban primacy rate, right? Unlike other African or Latin American countries. So then we ask this question, that is it the case that the slum is a big city phenomena? However, interestingly, in India, more than half of the slum population are in towns. They are living in towns. By town here, I mean that those urban settlements with less than 1 million population. Then going to the hypothesis of Professor Amitabh Kundu's hypothesis of exclusionary urbanization, what he hypothesized is that over time, the Indian cities, bigger cities, have stopped integrating the migrant population. They are no more accepting migrant populations, and the migrants are now pushed towards the degenerated peripheries of these bigger towns, or in other words, to those smaller towns around the bigger cities. So he also hypothesized emergencies of slums and or squatter settlements in and around the bigger cities. Now, if we look at the availability of basic services from an equity point of view, specifically from the vertical equity point of view, it is expected that the poor should be provided with a higher level of basic services, and as we know that basic services helps expand the income earning opportunities. However, in the Indian case, this is not happening. So what we do in this paper, that we move beyond these dichotomies or binaries in discussing urban poverty and basic services availability, and we make an intersection of slum and non-slum areas with cities or towns areas, and ask how the poor are distributed among these four intersectional categories. And then we also try to understand the association between poverty and availability of basic services, or in other words, we'll attempt to find out if the geography of poverty is following the geography of basic services availability. For this paper, I have used 4 rounds of basic services rounds collected by the NSS spanning from 2002 up to the year 2018. And this basic services availability round is a unique data source that carry data on whether a household is located in a bigger city or a town, or whether it is located in a slum or in a non-slum area. However, in the Indian case, in general, the poverty is measured through using those consumption expenditure rounds using those official poverty lines. However, these basic services rounds I have used here do not capture all the total the total consumption expenditure data. Hence, this official poverty line previously, which was formulated by the Planning Commission, is not properly applicable for this data set, basic services data sets. So what I have done in this paper, that I have denoted the bottom 40% of the total urban household in terms of expenditure, consumer expenditure, as the poor. As in the morning session, Dr. Bhan was saying that nowadays people don't work with this relative poverty kind of thing. So here in this paper, I have used this relative poverty definition. And to understand the availability of basic services following Nolan and others, I have calculated a basic services deprivation score using 4 basic services like drinking water, then drainage management, then garbage collection facility, and presence of a motorable road. Which actually I have chosen these 4 basic services availability because they are common across all the years. Coming to the modeling part, as we know that the poverty is a dichotomous variable, so I have used binary logistic models where the focus variable is where intersectional residential types is, and for the availability of basic services, I have used ordered logistic model, because as we know that in terms of the availability of the basic services across different households, we can actually arrange those households into a hierarchical group. So here we have used the order logistic models, and where the focus variable is residence types and poverty status. And then coming to the result part, the first panel of this table shows the share of a particular type of household to the total household share in urban areas, where the second panel shows the share of a particular household to the total poor households in a particular area, and the last panel shows the ratio between poor households share to the total household share. And here for the ratio part, any value more than 1 means that there is a higher concentration of poverty, and as expected for the slums have a higher concentration of poverty than non-slum parts. Cities have a less concentration of poverty than the town part. And what is interesting to note here is that compared to the town, compared to the city slum areas, towns at the aggregate level, meaning both the town slum households and town non-slum households tended to have a higher poverty, at least up to the year 2012, and then we can witness a slight decline in this trend. And town slum households within these four intersectional categories are the worst in terms of poverty concentration. Coming to the modeling part, table 4 shows the relationship between slum residents and poverty, and as expected, slum residents had a higher poverty, had a higher probability of being poor compared to their non-slum counterpart across all the 4 cross-sectional models and as well as for the pooled model. And table 2 shows that town households compared to the city households had a higher probability of being poor. And the last table shows the interactive variable part, where we can see that for the year 2009 and 2012 as well as for the pooled model, compared to the city slum households, town households at the aggregate level had a higher chance of being poor. And now coming to the basic services availability part, as the BHDS part, as BHDS is a deprivation score, higher value means higher deprivation or lower access of basic services facility. And again here, similar to the poverty situation, what you can see that compared to the city slum households at the aggregate level, town households, both meaning town slum and town non-slum households, had a higher level of deprivation in basic services availability. And across all these 4 intersectional categories, over time, what you can see that though there is an increase in the availability of basic services from all these categories, but compared to the non-poor, the availability of basic services has increased less for the poor, or in other words, the inequality between the poor and non-poor in receiving basic services availability has gone up for all these intersectional categories. And lastly, here what I'm showing is that if there is any association between poverty status or basic services availability. Again, here what we can see from these 5 ordered logic models, that poor have a much higher chance of getting basic services availability. As this is a deprivation score, higher odds means lower basic services availability, and which is also true for the pooled model. So in the conclusion part, what we can see that, or what we can say that slums are not only those areas where the poor are living, and they're again like Dr. Bhan and others and Chandrasekhar have shown earlier that it is not the case that poor are only living in slums. So those policies who are only targeting the slum areas to arrest urban poverty is not probably going to work. And town slum households, and there are 3 million of them in the year 2012, are facing a dual burden of being citizens of a town. There is a metropolitan bias, and again, they are within slums, non-slum areas. Again, they are facing the bias of being slum households. So they are facing a dual burden, and they are the worst sufferers in all types of welfare measurements here. And unfortunately, here we can see that the geography of basic services availability follows the geography of poverty in urban India, or in other words, the policy responses to the existing poverty seems to be inequitous, as the poor are receiving lower access to publicly funded basic services, and over time, in the inequality between the poor and non-poor is also on the rise, which is an alarming part. An alarming call for us as well. And lastly, this is rightly not part of my work, but what I have put it here because, as you know, that India is witnessing more and emergence of more and more smaller towns. Okay, and these smaller towns are home to more than 55% or the half of the slum populations. And on the other hand, we have a strong metropolitan bias in India. So here we'll probably be seeing a conundrum in those poverty and basic services issues over time. Because as we know that during 2001 and 2011, census towns share to the total urban population growth was 30%, and certainly there was as those are not statutory bodies, slums. There was no slums in those census towns. So probably these are the issues that should be looked at from a policy perspective. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Divya. So I want to thank everyone for their presentations. I think the commonality amongst all researchers dealing with studying inequality and inclusion, that all of you have been deeply engaged in your research and very reflexive about both the policy environment that your topic is within and how you've approached it. And so I want to thank you for very heartfelt presentations to kick off Urban Arc. I'm going to check whether, so we don't have any questions on the Zoom box now, but please do write in. And even the audience here, we'll just start to circulate mics. If you do have questions, please think of them. I do want to ask certain questions to all the presenters myself, so I will take the opportunity to do so. I think the presentations today lead quite well from this idea of pathways of change, right? Which is what kind of we were thinking about in the earlier panel as well. That there are certain things about the urban form in India that have been misread and miscalculated, which is why we're not able to properly access people and help them. It's one of the key challenges that has come out from the morning and from this set of presentations. So maybe I can just start by asking questions around that. So, you know, the case of PUKAR, Abhishek, it would be really interesting for you to help us reflect on when we have civil society-led programs that, you know, start very grassroots, but then evolve into having some form of formal certification. There again, it seems to be that the grounded approach and some kind of formal institutional approach come and are at odds with each other. So can you help us understand, you know, what does the PUKAR case tell us about how the formal institutional landscape needs to change? Right? If people are, again, getting dropped out of the program, what does this mean for how we can speak back to that? Similarly, with the case on child migrant workers who are not being able to find a footing in the formal education institutions because there has been no sensitization around that, I think it's really important to kind of deeply think through cases of failure when it comes to policy interventions. And it seems to be like this case around the RTE has come from a good place but has not been able to be implemented well. So what do you think then are, Sujata, what do you think are the role of non-state actors in being part of interventions? What do you think should be the allocation of responsibility between the state and non-state actors when we think about programs like this and how they can be also scaled, right? Because it is a public intervention. I think for the presenters who are here with us on small enterprises, I have found your presentation really exciting. I think we have known some of these things intuitively, but never had any data. And what you have given us for researchers like myself who think about labor enterprises is really a solid set of data to think about what it means to either save the nano enterprise or destroy the nano enterprise, right? So maybe could you help me understand, now that we do know this, what kind of resilience do we need public institutions to give these enterprises, right? Is it that we need insurances and cash transfers for the household running them? Or do we need the ability for them to file for bankruptcy? Where do you see the line of how to see them, right? This is a big question of what's the nature of their entrepreneurship that can be safeguarded by the state? And Divya, for you, you know, you have given us a very clear idea that your poverty matters not for just the structural location you come from, but also where you live, right? Where you live can give you can kind of reproduce that inequality. Would you suggest then that you made the point at the end that we have a metropolitan bias in urban welfare provisioning? Would you make a case then from your data that we need a whole different set of thinking for small towns? Right. So I'm just going to leave you all with these questions and maybe ask Abhishek if you can just take a quick 2 minutes to start responding and all the responders, and we do have some questions coming in which I'll add to.
Yeah, thank you, Aditi. So about the question about institutionalization and what we gain and what we lose, I think it's a really deep question related to the mainstream. So mainstream skills like writing in English. If we're talking about knowledge production and interventions in the city, so it really the questions about the heart and soul of the program, which can only come through this type of research where we reflect on what has happened since 18 years and what should be the path forward. So there isn't a clear answer to the question, but these things were considered back then as well about what we're going to lose out on and what we're going to gain, and a moment of reflection and realignment, redirecting can take place. But collaborations are very useful. So PUKAR has also conducted this program in an abbreviated form as a 2-credit course in Khalsa College and BMN College in Mumbai. So there are these possibilities that are there, and the terms of engagement can be very individualistic. So like, based on one individual professor who has a decision, who has this heart to do the program, and then that collaboration really builds. So there isn't like a pattern that we can easily allude to, but they're really fundamental to what the program is trying to do in terms of what we think fellows should do after the program ends. So no simple answer from my side.
Thank you. Sujata, can I ask you to kind of respond to the question I had in about 2 minutes?
Yes, Aditi. You've asked a very important question, the role of non-state actors. Actually, the problem is so widespread that we cannot imagine its solution or its implementation without the non-state actors. So this whole initiative which I saw in Jaipur, it's a very good collaboration of state and non-state actors, in which there's a police university of Rajasthan which is involved, and their professionals are trained to handle such cases, and the training are done by the non-state actors who are on field dealing directly with these cases, the criticalities of such cases. And the psychosocial aspect is also looked by the non-state actors through counselings and sessions and education as well. Here, the most important thing that you also pointed out, the responsibility between the state and non-state. So it's very important because there's a district child protection unit at state level, which is seeing a lot of things at the district. If it becomes their priority, things becomes better at every level. But it depends on the district child labor protection unit's head, or who's heading it, whose vision, whether it's in the vision of that leader or not. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sujata. Folks who are in the audience, are there also questions before we let Kinjal and Sharon respond?
Hi, my name is Neha. My question is for Sujata. I want to thank you for this. Hopefully, I won't veer into more of a comment than a question territory, but I do want to thank you for your presentation that really kind of tied together policy and economy and sort of the institutional landscape and so on. But what it really touched on the edge of, and which is something I don't think we talk about that often with the city, is really the question of trauma, right? The issues that you brought up were so clearly about institutionalized violence and trauma, really, and what you discussed about like the inadequacy of existing sort of counseling frameworks and so on. I'm wondering, from say even the policy point of view, like policy can be the most well-intentioned, like with the BOCW and so on. We hear sort of the really heartfelt intentions of the policymakers. So I'm curious for you from like the policy point of view, what sort of engagement with the sort of institutionalized forms that trauma can take, especially with, as you talked about, like the intersection of the psychosocial, the physical, and the economic, was it? Sorry, but there have been like sort of large-scale studies done called the adverse childhood experiences studies that talk about like poor physical health outcomes for people who've experienced things like this. And also there have been Indianized versions of that, so the Indian wheel of power and privilege and so on. So I was wondering, in terms of the specificities of your work, what room is there to engage with some of these frameworks, if at all? It's really sort of a politics of rehabilitation and mainstreaming that I suppose applies to Abhishek's issue as well, but I just wanted to ask. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It was very elaborative understanding of the issue. So the Juvenile Justice Act, our JJ Act, it specifically focuses on the trauma that the child go through the whole process of rehabilitation, and it did have a it does have a provision of psychosocial rehabilitation through counseling. But when the policy always has a very good intention, and the policy is a document which has a vision, which is a noble vision, but how it is working at the grassroots, it is always conflicting with that vision. So we have the things that I have visited many shelter homes, and I've seen different scenarios there. So there you will see children interacting with the counselors twice or thrice, and with a very good rapport building up with the counselor, with certain gradually with the time. But I have also seen counselors who are sitting at the chair and the child is sitting on the ground, and they are taking the children's statement. So these kind of micro management, micro supervisions, how these will be done is always contested and is always in conflict with the policy vision. So yeah, provisions are always there. They are there in even in Right to Education Act, Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, it has mentioned that from 2017 that the rescued child labor should be given specialized training before they are. But how it is being implemented, I've never seen any school. The school I visited in Gaya, the school didn't even know that they have such case in their school. So the reality and the policy will always be in conflict in such cases.
Okay. Thank you, Sujata.
Thank you.
Kinjal and Child, would you like to take that question?
It's more about scheme.
Yeah, so I think two questions there. I know the first one was more rhetorical, but let me take that also head on, which is to save the nano, not save the nano. And here I'll just extend it to micro, or I think it's important to understand the role of the MSME in many things, apart from just, sort of contributing to the GDP. It is also one of the most highest employing segment in the economy. And for growth to be broad-based, you will have to start imagining the smaller firms growing. The growth cannot happen at one end of the spectrum, so you have large corporates at one end and then individuals flourishing at the other, and you think that is going to happen. I don't think that is going to happen. And for that, we have to reimagine how these smaller firms are going to grow. At the risk of sounding extremely macro, so therefore I'm breaking down your second question, which was about then what is it? What is it that actually will infuse that kind of resilience? And I would say not just resilience, but we need resilience and their consistent growth, because that is the best antidote to actually crisis. One is if you look at it, the MSME ministry is one of the weakest ministries within the ministries that look after the, sort of the economic concerns of the country. Not only that, for most states, your industrial policy will be at loggerheads with the MSME policy. So firstly, we need some kind of coherence in that. And third big macro suggestion is the kind of data paucity we are dealing with is perhaps even more than what we presented in the first panel today. The Ministry of MSME has been quoting the same figure since 2017 in its annual report saying, oh, we haven't done the survey and here's the same figure as we quoted last year. So we don't even know if it's 63 million or if it's 53 million or 8.3 million or whatever that number is. The other big macro suggestion is that this categorization of under 5 crore annual turnover for micro just doesn't work. The realities of running a business that is 5 crore revenue and 10 lakh revenue is very different. We need better categorization and segmentation at that end. Now let me come to more meso level suggestions, which are more to do with the everyday operationality and something that Sharon said, the absence of aggregators when we think of actually bodies that represent them, something like FICCI, or they exist on paper, but they actually exclude these categories. So one is their ability to aggregate and create platforms, create highways of, sort of having conversations about this, influencing things. And the other part of it is, of course, how do you, build knowledge? A lot of our management practices are actually built assuming different conditions of doing business and do not take this into account. So building that knowledge and then transferring that knowledge or building it, co-creating it. So I think those would be some of the things.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the audience for these presenters?
So the question is to Kinjal and Sharon. I was wondering about it. You commented upon how the employee is also an investment. During my own work, I've seen how employees and within, they weren't firms, but economic operations, employees and employers were, as a matter of fact, from the same caste group or kinship relationships. How does that play into the relationship, say, in your study? And did that come up?
So my question was also to the two of you. What I wanted to ask is, there was one slide which spoke about female-headed enterprises. So I wanted to know how different was the employer and employee relationship in terms of the gender dynamics.
I can quickly answer that. So the gender dynamic, most women are sole entrepreneurs, so they don't have employees. So when they look at so women are disadvantaged. So if you take the latest NSSO data, I would say if you look at rural and urban, because our sample, or rural, semi-urban where our sample was, and if you start saying, okay, 20% of women have enterprise, the rest are men, and you start looking at categories of segment, like the bulk of the women are below 10,000 rupees a month turnover, or even profit turnover at 80%. Mm-hmm. And they have very little employees. Most of them are at home and home-based business. For men, it's very different. So that same, is like, say if you have like that 20% distributed across, 80% is for women. For men, it's about 4% are here, and the rest you can grow. It goes up to like 75 lakhs turnover a year, and you see a clear transition and things like that. So it's hard to, in our study, we could not study too much just because of the structure of the enterprises for that. The other question was, and Kinjal might have a different view, but if you look at these small firms, they put everything in it. So it's a matter of A, how you hire through your networks. So your networks is your caste and things like that. B, these group are often like almost accused of saying, well, it's you hire your staff. It's like nepotism in a sense. No, you get your family member. But when you think of it, everything is based on trust. So it's very difficult to hire somebody that you just don't know because they have no mechanism to supervise. So you don't want someone in your kirana shop having access to the petty cash and all of your stock that you've not known and vet. So how else do you vet somebody? So it's sort of like catch-22 in a sense. And I know for a fact that some people who look at, who specialize in looking at giving loans to this segment of people, and when you talk about alternative methods, one of the things that I was surprised as well, because I thought if it's family members, they're not going to grow, but it's sort of like the opposite in a sense that if someone takes a loan to say, I want to have another business in proximity, like they have a kirana shop and I want the other side, if they put their wife or their brother in charge, it means that they're very serious in a sense. So it's sort of like an alternative way to say, this is going to be very trustworthy and things like that, and I'll trust them to help them grow the thing. So just criteria.
No, just wanted to add to it, which is that even if a small firm owner wants to be agnostic, where are they going to go and find people? So it is almost, again, another kind of catch-22 where the only people you get is through the networks and you do not have some kind of an open jobs platform that's going to give you all the people. So I think, and I've done a lot of those studies where you go and find, oh my God, all of them are of the same class, there's a certain, but I have not studied the counterfactual of it, which is there a place where there was a chance for them to be agnostic and yet they went for that? So I think that question is kind of the way that labor market operates in an everyday way almost pre-chooses for both of them, and that's just how that system works. But beyond that, I don't think our survey went into those dimensions, so I'll hold back my opinion. Just one more thing, of course, I don't know why, but I left out the entire approach to credit for MSMEs. So yeah, that is another meso level sort of engagement that there is a lot happening, but I have more specific suggestions, which is that when we say, these small schemes for loans that were collateral free, but the final person responsible for that loan going bad was the final sanctioning officer in the bank who wasn't supported by the legal infrastructure of the bank. So that person's not going to take, that responsibility. So some of that detail lies in the devil. It's not about like banks don't want to or will they be forced. It is actually assuring that the friction is less at every step of it. So.
Also, interestingly, I guess in the responses you've had also to the questions, you haven't really touched upon what that's lovely word that we keep dealing with, formalization, means, right? So it seems like there are other mechanisms that you think would be more useful rather than trying to put a legal infrastructure to these enterprises. Am I correct in reading that, or is that maybe something you haven't touched upon in this? Because trust seems to be something that's coming out as a fairly good thing, right, from the presentation you're making.
I think formalization will take much more than whatever time you have. It's a huge loaded question, actually. I think so. Yeah. So that's probably why it's not touched upon.
Okay. So maybe we can move to Divya to respond. And there's a question in the Q&A box also, which is a bit more technical.
Yeah,
dealing with
I have seen it. So answering to your question or clarification, what is happening in India that the broader policies basically primarily for those who are meant for those infrastructural policies are biased towards metropolitan areas. So it is known to us. Even studies have shown that, for example, Amitabh Kundu and Samahan, they have shown that those programs were only meant for those slum areas. They are also favoring the metropolitan areas, right? So within the RAY program, Professor Kundu has shown that, Samahan has shown that within the Jain program, that these smaller towns are receiving less and less funds over time, and thus the inequality between those smaller towns and bigger cities will obviously widen up in time. So yes, there is a need for paradigm shift, and this is also there is in the literature where people have already argued that from the slum non-slum perspective. And here what I am saying that we are moving beyond the slum non-slum dichotomies. There should be the big cities and those towns. These dynamics should also come in place when you are talking about the deprivation or poverty, or when you are looking at to mitigate it. Okay, and I think that I have answered to your question, ma'am.
Thank you.
And to the question in the question and answer box, yes, you can disaggregate the NSS data from all of the rounds, particularly from 1990s, because as you know that NSS is a multi-stage data framework, okay? And within a district, there are two types of systems are set up. one only for rural areas and one for urban areas. But if a district has a bigger city or a metropolitan city or smaller towns together, then there will be two stratums, and for the bigger cities, the metropolitan stratums, what is the number of that particular metropolitan stratum, it is already given in their report or in their what they call as appendices or instructions. So from there you can easily find that which stratum belongs to which particular cities, and those urban bodies or those urban households are not included in those particular stratums meant only for those bigger cities are here considered as those who are living in the towns. So this is how we differentiate between households from a bigger city and from a town. And in addition to that, in a recently published paper, I have also tried to propose a new method. How can you actually estimate population size of each and every town? So what is within the NSA structure is known as FSU. So if you are interested on this, you may also look.
Okay, Divya, thank you for that. So Joy, who was asked the question, you can also get in touch with Divya to ask more specific questions about that if you like.
I have one quick question for me. I was curious. Yeah. How did you define slum? Like, because we did this exercise in Chennai where we looked at registered slums for the corporation. It was a massive summer thing. And there's actually half of the slums are not registered. So it's an ideal of understanding how do you define a slum? Do you use a state definition? Do you use, because do you use a poverty definition? And I'm always worried about district-wise data over time in this government because of the shift and things like that. Yeah. So just by curiosity, because those are one of the major things in your regression actually when you define poverty on.
Yeah, ma'am. For this study, what I have done that I have considered slums as those settlements. Those are considered as notified slum, non-notified slums, and houseless people within this NSA structure. So this is already there. And actually, ma'am, what you are actually, I suppose, trying to express is that many of these settlements are beyond these surveys. Okay, ma'am. So what one can done on this regard, that as I was telling, as I was saying that there is a settlement unit called FSU within this structure. So following, you can restructure or you can redefine your slum characteristics on the using basic services data from this particular FSU, and people have already worked on these issues primarily from the NFHS thing. So Professor Lauren Nolan has an excellent paper in the PDR. So where he has actually redefined those small FSUs into whether it is slum areas or non-slum areas. So this is also for my case. This is you can say as a limitation of my paper. So I am actually not doing this thing here for my study.
Okay, thank you for that. So with this, I want to wrap up the panel today. Thank you everyone who's shared their work and who has joined us online and here. Our next session will begin at 2:30, and that's on gender transitions, understanding urban change through gender. So thank you so much for everyone, and I hope to see you back in the afternoon.